Well, hello and welcome. It's hard to believe we are at the end of a year, and quite a year it's been, quite a year the last probably year and a half has been. But here we are on December 30th, 2021, getting ready to hopefully bring in a new and better year. Although, I think even though things have been challenging, there's always good things happening. So want to welcome you again to another Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint live event. And really excited about today's event, as always. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Guy Stevens. I'm the founder and executive director of the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint. I started the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint we're going on about 3 years now. And really started it to raise awareness about the use of restraint and seclusion in schools across the country. And what I'll tell you is that our mission continually grows. Our written mission is really about educating the public, connecting people together to change minds, laws, policies, and practices. So that we can see things like restraint and seclusion reduced and eliminated in schools across the nation and beyond. But what I will say to that is that our mission continues to grow and has since we formed. We really don't want to see any of the punitive things that are happening to kids and youth, often in the name of behavior, whether it's restraint, seclusion, suspension, expulsion, corporal punishment. What happens in the troubled teen industry, even what happens in medical settings and in mental health settings. We don't want to see these compliance and control approaches that are used that are really traumatizing and harmful to individuals. So our vision, of course, around schools is to see safer schools for students, teachers, and staff. Ultimately, we want to see all environments improved, and we want to see connection and compassion over compliance and control. So today I'm very excited as always. I have Claudio Moschella joining us today. Claudio is a principal at the Dixie Public School in Ontario, Canada. Claudio is going to be talking to us about SelfReg and how he uses the approach as a principal. And for those of you that may not be familiar, SelfReg is about kind of understanding stress and managing energy and tension. And by the end of today's event, you're going to know a lot more about SelfReg and also how it can be applied in a school setting. I do want to let you know that you're, as always, free to ask questions during the event. Talk to Claudio, and we will be taking questions as he goes through the presentation. He's even encouraged me to jump in with any questions I might have. So we'll have kind of an interactive presentation today. I do want to let you know that, as always, the session today is being recorded. So this will be available to view or listen to on YouTube, Facebook, and as an audio podcast. So if you're not able to listen to the whole thing right now, you'll be able to go back later and listen. So with that, let me go ahead and introduce our very special guest. And let me go ahead and welcome Claudio. Claudio, it's great to have you here today. And let me just give a brief introduction so folks will know who you are before we get started. Claudio Moschella, am I saying that right?
Moschella, you're saying it bang on.
Perfect. I told you on Monday when we talked, I'm like, I hope I get it right, and so I'm glad I did. So of course you're a husband and you're a father, and I always love when introductions start that way because certainly those are two of the most important roles that we have. I always start by telling people, first and foremost, I'm a dad. My journey into all of this kind of started from that with me. But you've got two girls, 7 and 3.
Yes.
Who no doubt have been keeping you busy during this break while you don't have your hundreds of other children. And you're working full-time as an elementary school principal in a kindergarten through grade 5 setting. And you also do some part-time course facilitation with the Mehrit Centre, supporting individuals on their learning journey of Shanker Self-Reg. And of course, we've also had Dr. Shanker and Susan Hopkins on here as well. So we've had a chance to learn a little bit about Self-Reg, but really excited to have you today because I think it's so valuable to hear from a perspective like yours. We often have the people that are joining us that might be the experts or might be parents or others. I think having it from a school principal's perspective, really excited to hear about your journey. So I'll stop there and just say welcome and thank you for joining us today.
Okay, Guy. Well, thank you for having me here. I guess I'm going to share with you how I've absorbed all this learning from Shanker Self-Regulation, and I find it very. It's been quite life-changing in terms of changing the lens on how I observe behavior. I've always had a fascination or an interest in understanding behavior, and I think early in my education career, the one thing I recognized is, I had a great connection with the students that I taught. They were always well behaved and in my classroom. And then, there'd be a change in teacher for, for planning time, or there'd be another phys ed teacher, French teacher step in, and all of a sudden their behavior would change. And I'm thinking, well, what's going on here? Or even going from the year they were with me to the following year, where I'd see the same students who were capable in my class struggling in the next class, some of them and some not. And I always wonder, something's amiss here. Like I'm not understanding behavior, and my journey has taken me in many different directions until about 2016, where I landed on Dr. Shanker's work, and that just kind of blew my mind away. I said, this is understanding behavior from a brain-based perspective. And since then, I like you said, I do the online courses. I facilitate online courses, which helps me learn even more with the stories that the learners share online. Their connections to the work helps me make more connections. And from that, I learned a lot through storytelling. Just hearing people's stories and how they connect with the work helped me make new connections with maybe some of the students I work with, or educators, or even my own family members. And it's just been life-changing. And all I want to do is just share what I've learned and how I've kind of absorbed it, and in this perspective as a principal, and how I kind of use it in my schools, and even my approach with staff, families, and
Well, that's great. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and bring your presentation up on the screen, and I will let you know, as we discussed, that as we get questions in, I might pop up with a question. You gave me permission to interrupt occasionally if I have questions as well. And we've got, and I think I've probably mentioned this before, we've got a fairly broad audience here at the Alliance. We have parents who have had children that have been on the wrong side of a lot of very punitive discipline, from restraint and seclusion and suspension, expulsion, corporal punishment. We have self-advocates, autistic self-advocates, who have themselves often been on the wrong side of a lot of behavioral interventions that have not been helpful, and quite frankly been harmful. But we also have principals, administrators, teachers, attorneys, all sorts of people involved. And, again, really excited about your perspective, because, I think the potential of influencing change as a school principal, and helping to set up the culture and really the systemic changes that are necessary is just so exciting to me, and I'm sure to our guests as well. So as I hand it over to you, I'll just let you know that we have actually people from all over the world joining us. I've already seen somebody from New Zealand that said hello. We've got somebody here from New Jersey, Columbia, Maryland, people that hopefully will be joining us from all over. It's not unusual to have some folks from Australia and the UK. And we're all really excited to have you here. So I have your slide deck up. I will let you take it away. And again, I might break in occasionally, but I'll try to just do so. Okay, sounds good. Thanks. Let's take it away.
So just to start off, Dr. Stuart Shanker, in his definition of self-regulation, from what I've learned, there's over 400 definitions of self-regulation in literature. And so the definition that I'm focusing on today is what I've learned from the Mehrit Centre, and that is self-regulation is about understanding stress and managing energy and tension. So just to help people understand that definition, basically stress creates tension, tension burns energy. And when stress is creating tension that burns energy, it leaves you with less energy to do other things, such as learning, such as being empathetic, such as your body healing itself. And that's what stress does. It's a fascinating topic to me. So this is self-regulation, understanding stress. What is causing you that stress that creates that tension, that burns that energy, that leaves you with very little? So we're going to talk a lot about that energy and tension and stress today. So this is Paul McLean's Triune brain. It's a metaphor of the brain broken up into three sections. This has helped me guide my approach with behavior in myself, as well as students and the adults that I work with. And just to give you a brief understanding of this and ask any questions, but again, this is not, I'm not going to get too technical with the brain. I'm trying just to keep it simple and understand behavior from a brain-based perspective. So the brain is broken up into three sections. We have our neocortex, the blue brain. This is where all our learning is, our abstract thinking, our empathy. When we're functioning in a nice blue brain, red brain balance, the blue brain is kind of leading the show. It's our imagination, our problem solving, all the good things we need. And really, when we're in school, it's our learning. This is where we want students when they're learning, either about their own behavior, about academics, whatever it is. The next part is our mammalian brain. It's our emotional brain. It's our limbic system. This is what is always scanning the room for it's our alarm system. It initiates the fight or flight when the body or the brain feels threatened, and that can be a physical threat or an emotional threat. This will sound the alarm and saying, "Uh-oh, we have a problem here. Let's get into our fight or flight," and then that communicates to the brainstem or the brown brain survival functions. So that is when all of a sudden our heart rate goes up, our breathing goes up, our body temperature increases, our immune system is suppressed somewhat, and that's because it doesn't want to waste any energy on the immune system. And what essentially it does is it slowly turns off the blue brain, because our blue brain uses a lot of energy, right? Learning requires a lot of energy. I think I've heard it burns about 15% of our energy when we're learning. Hence why you just can't learn throughout the whole day. I mean, most people can. Some people, I guess, are gifted with being able to push forward, but most people need that break. And that's why in school, we have recess, we have lunch breaks, is to allow the brain to restore itself. And for some students, you notice, they kind of lose that quickly. And we'll talk about that in terms of their stress and them having tension and burning energy. But what essentially happens is the red brain tells the brown brain, okay, we have a threat here, something's going on, let's get into our fight or flight. And then that's when you'll start seeing behaviors. And this kind of always helps me understand when I'm approaching a student, an adult in the building, where are they in their brain? And there's signals that tell me that they're in a stress response in their fight or flight, or that they're not. And so it'll help me kind of reframe where their behavior comes from. And just to get people to understand, self-regulation is not self-control. They're not the same things when we're talking about Shanker self-regulation. In order to have self-control, you have to be regulated. You have to be in a good blue brain kind of red brain balance where you're regulated, and you probably have that willpower to not eat those chips late at night, to have that self-control. But if you're in a stressful state, your body's going to do what it can to survive. And if it needs a quick boost of energy, then it'll go for the sugar or the chips or whatnot. So understanding that. And so essentially, when we are running low on energy, the brain will protect itself. The brain will say, we are going to stop learning now because we don't have enough energy. And we need to protect the very little energy we have for in case there is a threat. And so when we think about behavior, we think about children running out of energy, or even adults burning the candle on both ends, pushing forward when they really should be restoring. And what happens is the brain all of a sudden kind of goes into a fight or flight. And sometimes we're not even mindful of that happening to us. We're not mindful with the rat race of life, how we are just pushing forward when we should be taking a step back and kind of recovering and not getting into that fight or flight system. And so,
Claudio, if I just jump in with a quick kind of comment and question. You kind of mentioned about needing that reset, needing the recess, needing the break, whatever it may be. But one of the things that we often see in education are somewhat and misguided approaches. So child's having a difficult time, gets escalated, behaviors, and a response might be to take away recess or take away a break. Even heard of cases where children that might even have breaks as part of their individual education plan are told they have to earn their break, when in fact they really need that break to as you said, kind of reset. How, as a school principal, because I'm sure that in your career, you probably have a lot of people that you work with that are probably very aligned with your approach, but you probably had people that have started out and their responses to go punitive. How do you encourage people to really consider the importance of recess or those breaks?
Well, that's a good question, and it's always an uphill battle because you're dealing with very traditional approaches to behavior, which are punitive. I think, just to give you an example, when I was first learning about self-reg, I was a vice principal at the time, and I stepped into a school that still used detentions at recess. So kids lost their recess privileges and were kept in the whatever room that they had to stay in during those times. But it was interesting for me to watch how And something we talk about, limbic resonance, how that red brain, that mammalian, we're all connected through that mammalian brain. It's kind of like a Bluetooth connection between all of us. And it was just interesting to watch how the kids would be upset because they'd be in detention. The educator watching them would get upset with them. They kind of, their red brain would get triggered by the kids' red brain. And the lunchroom supervisors outside who were handing out the detentions because of the misbehavior, they were also kind of getting escalated. And so one of the things I consulted the principal with and some teachers about removing the detention. And we did. We said no longer were we having detentions. And so some people did worry about the school kind of, that's it, being lost in the behavior and kids kind of ruling the school without detentions. But that's kind of not what happened. Now, that being said, you don't just remove that and think things will be better. You know, it was a different approach now. It was now an approach of, it was a bit of educating the staff along with changing the system in the school. So one of the things was this triune brain, getting people to understand when a child is upset and angry, they're in their red brain. That is the reactive part of the brain. There's no learning going on. There's no remorse. There's no empathy. The only time learning happens is when you can calm them down enough to get them into their blue brain. And so time and time again, when I would deal with conflicts that were at recess between students or between student and educator, I would work, not understanding this, I now realized I needed to get the child in their blue brain, then we can get some learning happening. And more often than not, I'd have a child that was remorseful for their behavior. As soon as a child really felt that they were no longer under threat, they would then go into their blue brain, and I can tell they'd be smiling or laughing. Like, you just have to figure out when you know that they're there. And then there would be remorse. They would feel bad for what they've done. We talk about why they did what they did. There'd be, some sort of restorative conversation between the two students where nobody felt threatened anymore, or between the student and the educator, which kind of helped understand things. And so, slowly, it's an uphill battle, but slowly but surely people recognized, okay, there was merit in this work. Now, what I did learn is I don't try and convert anybody. Number one, I just try and show this, lead by example, share the information, and see, they see the long-term changes. And so, what I recognize is that those who resonate with this very closely, they're the ones I help create the momentum with. And then slowly but surely, the resistors, they're watching. I'm a strong believer that people are always watching, and they're watching from a distance. Those resistors are looking and seeing, and they will step in and buy in when they're ready. But I know there are always people close by who resonate with this work, and those are the ones I try and pull in and create that ripple effect and get this going.
Well, and I'm kind of taken, as I think about this conversation, taken back to when we first had an initial conversation. Oh, it was probably about 6 months ago or so. And you and I just were having a great conversation about all of this. And I don't want to put you on the spot here because you may or may not have the prop ready. But you had, as you were talking, you got so excited, you pulled out a glove that was a brain model, and you started talking about it. And what was going through my mind is, wow, what a great tool that was. And I can now, having talked to you several times and really enjoy the conversation, right. I can imagine Principal Moschella with the glove explaining to people the brain. Do you by any chance have that glove?
Oh, so
there it is. Okay, can you explain that real quick? Because I love that, and it's such a great visual.
Right. So this is what you could tell. This is the brown brain, the red brain, and here's our blue brain. And so this is a hand model. Sorry, my screen is flipped here. A hand model that I learned about with the Mehrit Centre that came from Dan Siegel, and he called it flipping your lid. And so for children, so for young kids, we'd use this hand model. And we'd say, here's your blue brain where you do all your thinking, and it's a very big part of your brain. And then when you get really upset, what happens is the little red brain here kind of takes over, and we flip our lid, and that's when we're upset. And we kind of just use this model where the red brain takes over. And once the red brain's in control, the blue brain is no longer calm and kind of helping us with our problem solving. And the only way we can do that is by coming down back to our blue brain. And then, the red brain talks to the brown brain, which tells us to run, or, whoever our audience is in the K-5 setting, that's kind of how we try and get them to understand it. But, the younger the kids, the more they have exposure. They need exposure to this to understand it, because they'll always have questions. I mean, my daughter, who's 7 now, when we first started talking about this, she'd bring it back a few days later. Daddy, when you're talking about that red brain, blue, and she'd ask another question, and that would take time. But one thing I wanted to mention also is self-regulation. We all self-regulate, even children. Children self-regulate, but sometimes it's maladaptive, and sometimes it's growth promoting, and it's those maladaptive ways that we want to kind of help children with. And so, to say that kids, for them to be able to self-regulate themselves, really, that's very hard for a child. What I've learned is the blue brain and red brain don't kind of solidify or bridge that communication until we're in our mid-20s. And so what I mean by that is, take a young baby. When they're first born, a baby will cry to communicate some sort of problem. And it's very simple. A baby is either wet, they need their diaper changed, they're hungry, or they need to be picked up, essentially, right? It's simple when they're babies. It gets more complicated when they get older. But that baby will keep crying. That red brain will keep going on and on and on until an adult does something to take care of that baby, until an adult picks up that baby, feeds the baby, or changes their diaper. And if they cry long enough without being co-regulated, co-regulation is a big word, they'll just fall asleep, because now the brain's going to protect itself and not completely lose all its energy. It's going to put it to sleep, right? So during this time, our job as adults is to help children co-regulate. When their red brain is on, it's our job to lend our blue brain. It's our job to calm them down. In schools, when kids are having meltdowns, it's our job to calm them down first, get them in that blue brain, then we problem solve, because you're problem solving with a child in their red brain, and we're all guilty of it. I'm guilty of it too. Talking to a child when they're hyperventilating, nothing is registering, nothing. You're not teaching them anything. If anything, they're waiting for you to go away. So just for me, this triune brain really has helped me recognize when I'm dealing with issues between students, I have to make sure that I got them in their blue brain again before we can fix the problem. And oftentimes when I'm working with students, I'll have them in separate rooms, because they could set each other's red brain off, and then I'm back to square one. I have to make sure that everybody's calm. So it's a different approach. It gives me the tools, and I feel like now I know how to deal with situations, even when I make calls to parents, recognizing that if I don't have all the details and understanding where this conflict started from, it's hard to have that conversation with a parent. If I call a parent now and I just say, your child or daughter got into a physical altercation with another child, and so here are the consequences. That is not going to work. That is not going to work. What I do know works is, if I say your child got into a conflict, they kind of got really upset. When we got to the root of it, these were the reasons why your child got upset, and these were the reasons why the other child got upset. They have since been remorseful. They're calm now. They're not angry with each other, and so now everything's good. And so that helps even a parent get into their blue brain.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like these concepts are really important for everybody, whether it's a student, understanding their own brain state, or an educator. I mean, if you begin to understand how, when we're in our red brain, the blue brain is kind of going offline there, your response to a child who's having a difficult time is not to put demands or put orders on them. It's understanding kind of where they are and trying to support them. So, really, really important. I do want to mention a couple of quick comments here, and then I'll be quiet and let you continue on. But I love the model, and thanks for I'm glad you had that handy here. Here was a comment from Nicole, who said this, and this was as you were going through this model here. This should be the information all teachers and staff get at the beginning of the year and a refresher mid-year. I would agree.
I love that comment, Nicole. But what I'm also going to say with that is, what I've also learned as a principal is that the self-regulation of staff is just as important as the self-regulation of students. And I realize I've come to, and this is where mindfulness comes in, is knowing yourself first. When I first started reading these books on self-regulation and taking courses and reading up on people like Daniel Siegel and Tina Payne Bryson and Dr. Perry, is you got to take care of yourself first. Because what happens is, we talk about calm begetting calm. So, for those of you that are parents that have children, You know how to calm your child down, your baby, calm them down. Same thing happens in elementary school, but it requires a lot of energy from you. If you are burnt out and you are tired, and let's be honest, the pandemic for educators has completely worn us out. You have very little energy for other people. And so now you're coming to work. And yes, I could share this information with staff, and I can help. And I've been learning this since 2016, and I still slip into old ways because I'm sometimes attending school kind of with very little gas in the gas tank. And so what happens is my red brain, unable to reframe behavior, kind of all of a sudden it becomes reactive, and or I just hold it together and I really kind of reframe what I'm seeing. But then I get home and I have very little left for my family. So I've come to realize this is important learning, but just as important as your own self-regulation. You're only as good as your energy levels allow you to be.
Yeah, in that vein, there was a great comment here by Susan Jones. Susan said, "I've discovered that those resistors," kind of talking about the people that might be resistant to new ideas, are often also in a perceived threat.
Yes.
Sometimes the same as a student. So, when you're going to somebody, their resistance might really be based in not feeling safe or feeling threatened.
Absolutely, and we if we react a certain way to resistors, is that because we are kind of low on energy, right? I do every now and then there are staff that are resistors, and if I've got a good amount of energy, I can go in with a different kind of mindset and actually maybe appreciate the resistance and kind of flip that and then make them feel safe. Sometimes resistance is they don't feel safe in the school. They don't feel safe at me as a principal. They're not safe with the relationship we have with me for whatever reason. Maybe there's a long history of poor relationships with their previous supervisors, right? So why are they going to paint the brush with me any differently? Kids are the same way. A child who maybe in kindergarten, grade 1, grade 2, grade 3 has had a terrible time in school, that grade 4 teacher can be fabulous and dynamic, but that red brain doesn't know any better for a child. That red brain sees that grade 4 teacher like a threat. You are a teacher, my red brain is going off, it remembers all the past teachers, and you're no different. So sometimes the hardest students with the most challenging behaviors that are caught in their red brain for a long time, it takes, and I've seen it firsthand, staff that kind of buy into the approach. And of course, me as an administrator, I have to support them. There are times where kids are really, they're struggling, and I got to help that I have to help that educator out. But that child, I've seen children who have struggled with their self-regulation. We continue to build that feeling of safe, continue to try and turn on that red brain, and sometimes by December or March break, all of a sudden they're a different child. It's like that red brain finally turned off, and you see a totally different child. But do you know how much energy that takes? Yeah, you must. That takes a lot of energy to give that child what they need. People talk about attention-seeking behaviors. Yeah, they are teaching. They are seeking attention because, we are built to be connected with each other. And if you have no connection with anybody, it's your red brain that's just going to protect you, and that's it. It's going to keep going off. But we're going to talk about that. So, shall I go to the next slide?
Yeah, let me get one more quick. I saw one I wanted to hit here. And this was a good one, and then we'll go on to the next slide. Linda said, have you done any work with your parent community, and where did you start? And that's a great question because, of course, the more that we can do to have experiences for a child that might be consistent would probably be helpful. So have you done any work in terms of trying to spread the word about self-reg or in working with parents?
So that's a great question, Linda. Thank you for that. So there's different things I've done. Obviously, so we have a school council, 3 or 4 parents that might show up. It's never maybe you refer to it as parent council. We call it school council. But what I have found over my time as an administrator, it's every phone call I make. Every phone call I make is through a self-reg lens. It is me trying to talk about the stress triggers of their child. It's just about, your child did this today, and I'm trying to figure out why. I'm trying to understand why the behavior. And I'll ask questions about their sleep patterns. I'll ask questions about, are they worried about anything? Is everything okay at home? Just to find out what the triggers are that wears out that child's energy. That child can have so much stress from home life or from something that happened after school. Like it's amazing when I've asked so many questions to parents to find out so many different things that parents are thinking it was no big deal. But in my mind, I'm like, that's a huge stress for that child. That's burning their energy. And now they're coming to school age. And first conflict ends up into, it becomes a major event when really it shouldn't have been. So the conversations, knowing how to now speak with parents and I educate them with each phone call I make is probably the biggest one. You know, I've tried to have a book talk, and right before we purchased 30 books of Stuart Shanker Self-Reg, the pandemic began. So I still have 30 books sitting in my office because I know I could do it virtually, but I really want to do this stuff in person. Even school newsletters, I always try and do a little tidbit, just something to make parents think about. But right now, you know, sharing with parents, that's really the biggest one is through phone calls when I have to call parents at home, or sometimes they call me. I think a month ago I had a parent call me, and this is, I guess, the reputation you build when you do this long enough. They're calling me saying, I'm having troubles with my child at home. You know, this is what I'm seeing. And so I don't give answers, I give questions, right? Like at the end of the day, they are experts at their own children. I might be an expert at the K to 5, but they are experts with their own children. But it's, you know, through good questions. You know, I've also learned not to tell people, here's the answer, because it's impossible. Every child's different, but here's the questions you need to think about, come up with the answers, right? Because what Self-Reg has helped me do is help me ask different questions now. Now that what I've learned through the Mehrit Centre, I ask different questions now. You know, for example, I've learned students who get into conflict, and we're going to talk about the stressors as step 2 in Self-Reg. Is one of the biggest stress for some kids is when they get into a conflict, they think they've severed the relationship with you as an adult. And it's fascinating. So, and I learned this through the school social worker when we talk about this, that the relationship, losing a relationship is such a stress that you'll see bigger behaviors. Like, you know, a child running away from you. When I say, you know, come, let's talk, and they run away from me, it looks like defiance. But really in their mind, they're like, I don't want to face Mr. Moschella because he's going to be disappointed in me. So it's interesting. Some of the things I've said to kids, you know, kids have punched other kids, and I'll say, you're not in trouble. Don't worry. Let's talk. You know, if someone hears that who doesn't understand what I'm trying to do, they're like, look at this principal. Not in trouble. He's punched someone out, right? But in my mind, I'm thinking, they're in their red brain. What is it going to take me to get them in their blue brain?
Right.
And more often than not, I'll say you're not in trouble. Once they're calm in their blue brain, I'll say, so what do you think your consequence should be? And I've never heard someone say, but you said I wasn't in trouble. That has never come back to me. You know, once they're calm and rational, they're like, okay, I feel safe enough to accept the consequence, you know, and we kind of work from there, right? But again, all this learning helped me kind of see things differently and approach things differently.
So I'm going to let you go on to the next slide, but real quickly, somebody asked the question. I think I know the answer here, but what was the title and author of the book that you were referencing when you talked about doing a book study?
So I'll just real quick, Michelle, is the journey began when I read Calm, Alert, and Learning from Stuart Shanker. It's more of a textbook read, and that's kind of addresses the kindergarten to grade 6 audience. So after I read that, I was kind of blown away. I said, this is it. This is what I've been looking for. And in the book said, you know, they teach courses. So that led me to the Mehrit Centre, and I took their foundations course, which really changed everything. But the latest book I wanted to do with parents is called Self-Reg by Stuart Shanker. And Self-Reg is more of a read for parents, but he talks about the science. I really like the way he's written the book because he'll have a story with a family and their child, and he'll start off with maybe a baby, and then another couple with their toddler, and another couple with their teen child, and how Self-Reg applies. So it's a really great read. I really enjoyed Self-Reg, the book Self-Reg by Stuart Shanker.
Great.
Okay, so I was kind of talking about co-regulation and the importance of it for children, right? Because children, their red brain and blue brain are not really connected. When they go into their red brain, it really takes the help of someone else to get them back in their blue brain. And it's interesting how, you know, this is why kids go to seek their friends out maybe sometimes when they don't seek out educators or parents because maybe they don't feel safe enough, you know, whatever the history is there. But really, this is Stephen Porges's work. He's got some fascinating work on the polyvagal theory. but I'm not going to get into that. But really what he says is, depending on the level of stress and energy, when we are in a stress response, if we have a good amount of energy, the first thing we'll do probably is social engagement. So you'll go to a friend, a family member, or you'll seek someone out who will co-regulate you and get you back in your blue brain. And you think about the students in your class maybe, or in the school. Who do they seek out? Do they seek out the teacher, that they need support with, or do they seek out their friends? No, if they don't have that, their next step is fight or flight. So for some students, they don't feel like they're going to be heard. There's a history of them in the school that they don't feel like they're liked. So they're in a threatful situation at recess. And that could be someone's making fun of them in a soccer game saying, "You're terrible. You're not good. Look at you." That's a threat to ego. Well, their fight or flight kicks in. So either they leave the game and say, "I'm not playing with you anymore," or they punch the kid out, or they push, or they shove, right? It's a fight or flight response. So in my school, I'm always trying to help kids. Just come find me. Find someone. Find me. They're like, "The teachers don't do anything." I said, and we reframe the teachers, right? Because it's stressful being out there at recess, right? They're trying to fix so many issues at once. So yeah, as an administrator, I understand that I need to be supportive. So part of that is come find me. And I have had some students, it's taken a few years, but they're finally coming to find me, right? And these were kids in grade 3, I remember, punch first, ask questions later, and enough interaction with them to let them know that, I don't see them as a bad person, that they are safe with me. I still give consequences out. Don't get me wrong. That still does happen, but not when they're in a red brain state. Never when they're in a red brain state. And so, now, I think of one particular student, grade 5, he doesn't react. He has enough energy to come seek me out first, right? Or wait until he can find me. And it's a lot nicer to deal with. It's much easier when no pushing or shoving or punches have been thrown. It's just been some arguing, and we can fix that, right? And I give them the time. They need the time. And I try to help educators in the building know that you don't have the time to solve these issues sometimes. So you got to let me know. You got to let the support staff know in the school, because sometimes these kids need 30 minutes. They need 40 minutes to kind of hash out whatever the issue is until that red brain turns off. And is it exhausting? Yes, it is. But it's a lot better doing it this way and making kids feel safe, because what we don't want is children with kind of a hair trigger stress response where they get stressed over things that really shouldn't be stressful, but they are, because they kind of it's kind of like, it's like a car alarm that goes off when a leaf falls on it. We have some of those students whose fight or flight is that sensitive, and that's years of being under a fight or flight system. So anyway, so as energy kind of wears out and stress increases, we kind of go down into this. This is kind of like moving from the blue brain, which is social engagement, down to the brown brain, which is dissociation. And so fight or flight is our red brain response, tells the brown brain to kick into action. The freeze response is essentially when the brain recognizes that neither running or fighting back is a good idea, so they'll just be frozen. And sometimes this looks like compliance, where they're just kind of just stone-faced and looking at you. They are not processing anything you say if they're just staring at you blankly. They're just waiting for you to go away. And that's really a primitive response. And dissociation is kind of like an out-of-body experience where the pain is so great that it's not felt anymore. Mm-hmm. So that's really when they're deep in their brown brain. And the idea is you got to get them back up to their blue brain so you can interact with them. So that is the hierarchy of stress response. And just remember, for some students, if you're an educator out there and you're dealing with a student right off the hop in September and they're already causing issues in the class and they're walking around or they're not listening, you have to understand what their history has been with school. And they're coming to you already in their red brain. So you just got to recognize that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we were talking the other day about this, and when I first saw that graphic, if you can go back for 1 second, there were a couple things that kind of flew through my mind. One is kind of thinking about the work of people like Bruce Perry. We see social engagement up there at the top, and of course, social engagement means that you have high energy and low stress. Very often people are so focused on learning, but if you don't focus on the foundation, if you don't focus on safety, we can't learn if we don't feel safe and secure. Teachers can't teach if they don't feel safe and secure. And I think about, I think it was Bruce Perry that kind of talked about how, with safety, social engagement will emerge. But very often there are approaches that are taking kids that are already in a fight or flight or already hypervigilant and trying to then force kind of social situations on them that they're just not ready to take part in, which I think is really interesting. So I mean, I think that look of energy and stress, and again thinking about that foundation of safety. The other thing that this really brought to my mind, and I think you and I talked about it a little the other day, was this idea, and you've already kind of hit on the fact that our brains are not fully developed until our 20s, somewhere in our mid 20s. And what we very often see are very young kids that don't yet really have the ability to self-regulate, but are expected to self-regulate. So they don't even have the developmental capacity to self-regulate. And kids that may have had trauma or may have had other background that are already close to a fight or flight mode, that may have behaviors that escalate. And I think about this in the context of things like seclusion, where kids are forced into a room against their will with the door held shut, and there's nothing at all that's calming about that. I mean, it's extremely stressful, yet it's often done in the name of calming. People believe that forcing a child in a room by themselves against their will somehow help them calm. And they very often, I think, mistake that final step there, dissociation, because the child, after expending their energy, may come to a point where they just kind of ball up in the corner and have entered a dissociative brain state where they're just trying to protect themselves. But people look at that and go, oh, well, they're calm, they calm down. And that nothing can be farther from the truth. They've certainly
not ran out of energy.
That's right. That's right. But not only that, you're putting that child in the room, by themselves. They need to, as you mentioned it earlier, I love the way you put it, kind of borrow our blue brain. They need our help to co-regulate. So,
can I jump in?
Yep.
It goes back to us taking care of ourselves. And when we don't know the how, or we don't have any answers, we go into a reactive state, and it's unfortunate when we go into a state where we seclude kids or restrain them. I look at some of our students that are on the spectrum, and at a young age, I'll see a lot of hand holding, and I'll ask staff, I'm like, what happens if you let go of their hand? Well, they'll run. I said, okay, let's see where they run. Right? It's information. But I have to reframe the staff, because I understand why they're holding on to that child's hand. They're scared to lose a kid. Like that's the red brain staying on a high alert, saying if you let go of this child's hand, they're going to run away, right? And so when I do see that, as a principal, I have to put things into place to help the educator as well, and say, okay, it's recess. We're going to let go of the hand. Let's see where this child goes. The child will run, and we have a big open area in the back of our school, which is nice to have. But we'll be out there. We have walkie-talkies. We're ready. Let them run. Let's see where it goes, right? And then we do it a few times to recognize where they're running to in the yard is maybe where they're going to self-regulate, right? Like I said, everybody looks for ways to self-regulate to kind of de-stress, and that includes students on the spectrum. So I just to your point there about understanding the stress of educators, and when you're making decisions, are you in a fight or flight state when you're making that decision or that reaction to behavior, and how important it is to be rested. But myself as a principal, I understand I can't just leave it on educators. Like, they need the support as well. Like, I'm asking them to do something that could be very stressful. So how do I reduce that stress? I mean, that's step 3 in Shanker Self-Reg, is reducing stress.
That's great. I appreciate it. Let me let you carry on, and I want to again just remind people that are watching, if you have questions or comments as we're going through, feel free to put those in the chat.
So we talked a bit about the triune brain, and so this is where Shanker Self-Reg is a 5-step process. One thing we talk about, it's not a program. It's not a cookie cutter program we're following. It's kind of a mindset shift and understanding, because everyone's different. Every individual is different in what their needs are in their own self-regulation, student or adult. And oh, actually, can I go back?
Yep.
So we talked about you said something and it triggered a thought in me. So we talked about social engagement. What I want the viewers that are out there to recognize as well is resistant parents. So what I've learned, and I didn't know this as an educator, I learned it as an administrator coupled with my learning of SelfReg, is parents that come across as maybe argumentative, resistant, that say my child doesn't act like that, we reframe their behavior. You have to understand that their history with the institution of education may also be something that causes a fight or flight in them. And what I'll tell you is, a year before I started learning about Stuart Shanker self-regulation, I had a phone call. I was calling this parent, and really her child was in grade 8 at the time, and really just dysregulated all the time, called me every name in the book. And I called this mom and I said, please just come in and let's talk and try and figure out, what we can do to make this child's life happier at school. Like, I think he's 13 at the time, and it's already like 13 years old, and he's already this dysregulated, not a care in the world for school. Like, I just thought it was heartbreaking almost. 13 years old. And this mother said to me, I will never come in that school because I know what you're going to do. You're going to yell at me because I'm a bad parent. And I had kind of an epiphany moment, recognizing that every parent has their story, right? And they come in guarded, and we have to understand that. And making, and that's something too that I talk to staff about. When you make phone calls about behavior, you cannot just call a parent and say, your child did this, this, and that. You've got to be able to say something that makes them feel safe with you, that, hey, your child's acting this way, but this is what I think. I think it's this, this, and this, and this that might be setting it off. Do you see this at home? And now it becomes a behavior, not who the child is, not and so that social engagement with parents takes time as well. And we get parents that come to our school that have been at other schools, and I'll tell you this year, one parent's like, I feel like your school is the least racist school that my child's been at. And I don't know why she said that, but if I'm going to guess, it's probably because we don't just call and say, your child's doing this, this, and this, right? We try and understand what's dysregulating the child, right? So, and that's for any child as well. When we call those parents, that's how you build that safety, with making parents feel safe when they know you have their child's best interests at heart. But SelfReg has helped me have better conversations with parents, so they're more constructive, and the guards are down, and they're willing to, hear me out, or I'm willing to hear them out and get some information. Because sometimes I'll call parents and say, okay, these are my questions. Do you have any information for me to help me understand better? Right? And that's huge. I think that's me as a parent. I'd love to hear how the school wants my input on my child. Right? That's the idea. So, sorry, I just want to go back on that point.
Yeah, and it seems the point there is understanding and managing stress for all. It's
Right.
not just about the approach. And we make this point commonly with other things, but I think this holds really true here too, is that, self-reg isn't just about the children or the youth that you're working with. It's about the adults. It's about the parents. It's about everyone that you're interacting with. So this framework that you're talking about is something that you're using consistently, because you know how it is. It's people. The perception is blame the kids, then blame the parents,
Yeah.
and it's no wonder a lot of people come in really with their stress levels high,
Yes.
and their energy level low.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is the 5 steps of self-reg. It's not a you jump in wherever you feel you need to jump in during this time, and but it's not a linear 5 steps. It's not, you have to do 1 to get to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5. So the first step is reframing behavior. So reframing behavior essentially is when you see something in yourself, your own behavior, as well as maybe the behavior of students or parents or colleagues, is why and why now. Ask yourself why and why now. Understanding stress behavior versus misbehavior is what we're trying to get at. And so when you ask those questions, why now, you are thinking. If you are thinking, you are in your blue brain. If you're in your blue brain, you're staying calm. That's the idea. I remember when I was at the SelfReg symposium in Peterborough, Ontario, and I asked Stuart, I said, what's the difference? And he actually said, and in a simple answer he gave me, he's like, you use a different path of your brain when you ask these questions. And I kind of understood that, because really, when you don't ask why is this behavior and why now, if you're saying it's because of this, that's a reactive response.
Mm-hmm.
And that's your red brain. And really, that child's red brain is sucking your red brain with them, in with them. And so reframing behavior, asking why is this happening, why now, keeps you thinking. And really, at my school, we're trying to teach the students this, because children can easily get into their red brain. They're just so reactive. And he did this because, and they already have an answer to it. And I'm like, did you ask why? No, right? So teaching children this is a huge, advantage for them, is staying calm in that blue brain. So when we reframe behavior, we're always trying to ask why and why now. So I'm going to jump to a video, and I want you to, let me just click here. So I want you to observe the video and recognize if it's stress behavior or misbehavior. And of course, don't just focus on the behavior. You're going to ask yourself why and why now. And even considering what we learned about blue brain, red brain, and where these people are as this is going on. You may have seen this video already, but I think it's a great example of how we, there's a quick stress, and then we're in our blue brain and red brain. So just watching, and we'll talk about this. Can you pay attention to this? So the point of the video is, number one, to show how everybody responds differently. Fight or flight, stress response. Some people jump back because they thought it was a threat, and then one gentleman there actually fought back and he punched. And the point I want to make here is reframing this behavior. Why this behavior happened? Well, they were scared. When you're scared, you respond a certain way. But if you notice, when they got back into their blue brain, what was their response like? The people that were scared and took a step back, they laughed after. They realized the blue brain's like, oh, the blue brain told the red brain, oh, it was just a joke. Don't worry about it. It was just a prank, right? So the blue brain now is back in control. And the gentleman who did the punching, if you notice, he didn't just leave. He was remorseful. Once he realized it wasn't a threat, once the blue brain pretty much said, whoa, it's not, it's a joke. It was a joke. He was remorseful. He's like, oh my goodness. And he was sorry. He was checking to see if he was okay. And this is what happens in school. Like, when we have conflict and I am able to work through it with children, they're remorseful after. And when I have to make that call home to parents and I can tell them that calms parents down too. And everybody's calm, even though it's a conflict. In the classroom, when we have kids that might melt down and rip the classroom apart or have an epic meltdown, the job is for the other kids, because I think it's also a great learning opportunity, is what I also do is go into that class and have a community meeting, and I help, especially young kids, make sense of what they just saw. Because when a child sees another child rip a classroom apart, screaming, crying, whatever it is, they're in their red brain, and their red brain is creating its own narrative. And then going home and saying, this is what happened, mommy, a 6-year-old or 7-year-old trying to explain that to their parent. I don't know, I have a 7-year-old, the story, I get bits and pieces throughout, and it's hard to understand what they're saying. But when I go into those community meetings and I talk to the class, I'll ask, why? Why do you think so-and-so did that? Why do you think they got so upset today? Why? Like, why now? Helping kids at a young age reframe what they see in others so that they're not gripped with fear and that their red brain doesn't always go off. Reframing is a huge, huge advantage for children to learn at a young age, right? Right now, we are getting swept by the pandemic. And it's like our red brain is probably on all day, every day. And this is what's causing us to be so exhausted as well, is that we're stuck in this kind of stress cycle of worrying about, like, I'll tell you right now, my worry is I'm running out of family responsibility sick days, that when my child's class gets shut down, someone has to stay home with her now because she's young, and we're running out of days, my wife and I. So another stress. So reframing. So I'd meet with the classroom, help them talk about it, help the blue brain make sense of what the red brain is so scared about, right? That's what we're trying to do, is trying to help that bridge that gap. So when they're in their 20s, they're able to do it on their own. They're able to reframe and not react to the behavior that they see. But this punch here, we suspend for this, right? And many times in conflicts I dealt with, once it's been dealt with and everybody's remorseful and we all understand why everybody did what they did, and it's not so scary. Like if one child understands where another child's coming from, they're not as scared anymore. They're not looking over their shoulder at that child. For those of you that teach in classrooms, you might have kids, well, he's staring at me. And then, yes, he is staring at you because you're a threat to him. He needs to know where you are in the room. That tells me the issue has not been solved yet, right? That is a key reframe that there is an issue going on here, has not been solved yet. When you get those kids staring at each other, that's their red brain making sure, it's called neuroception, scanning the room to make sure there's no threats. It's always on. So in this example here, the video I'm showing you, we suspend, like I said, we suspend for that. And sometimes we don't really have to. And if parents are happy with the way it was resolved, and the children are happy, and everybody's back to feeling safe again, we could talk about consequences, but sometimes it's that feeling of guilt that's a huge consequence as well. So that's step one, reframing the behavior. So moving on to step two. So step two is about recognizing stressors. So there are so many stressors that we have that burn our energy. Remember, these stressors, if they're not reduced, then our energy gets burned, and then it's harder for us to do things like learn, sit in our desk for a certain amount of time. We have kids that walk around the room because sitting down requires energy. Listening requires energy. If they've got none, you're going to see those behaviors escalate. But in Stuart Shanker's book, Calm, Alert, and Learning, the whole book is pretty much dedicated to the 5 domains, which is step 2. And in the 5 domains, there are different types of stressors. There's biological stressors. So these are things that burn energy. For some people, it burns it a lot more than others. Some people can go on 4-hour sleep and they're refreshed and they're good to go the next day. Some people are not. So biological stressors, being hungry, sitting too long, these are all things that might burn energy. Heat. I have some students that they always take their shoes off. It's like they have hot feet. But we've come to realize, okay, this is a stressor for this child. They're not trying to misbehave and take their shoes off and fling them about, right? It's, again, reframing the behavior. Why is this child taking their shoes off? Why now? So tooth pain, in the younger grades, there's a lot of kids that for some reason that tooth falling out, that's all they're focusing on, right? So when you're seeing them react and behave a certain way, you ask yourself, why now? Maybe it leads you to that stressor. We have emotion stressors. So the feeling of disappointment, embarrassment, that burns a lot of energy. It's an emotion that burns a lot of energy. Conflicts at recess. Now they come into the classroom and they're supposed to turn it off, turn the red brain off, and get to learning, right? Like this is where, as an administrator, I know I have to step in. I'll tell staff, you have to call me if you think something's up. I have to be able to bring it to rest and bring them back to their blue brain. If you want them to learn in your class, or else all they're going to do is going to get up, walk around, they're going to be disruptive because there was an issue at recess. And no issue is too trivial for a child. You have to understand that. At least in the K-5 setting, they can't overcome if someone says, you cheated at this game. It just keeps perseverating in their mind. And now that red brain's on, and we got to kind of deal with that. And so, a lot of stresses, cognitive stresses, time pressure. If we have timed tests, that's a huge stress for some kids. Some kids can handle it. Some kids fall apart at the seams, and you don't really know their academic potential because of the stress of time that we're putting on them. Concentrating for some kids. So anything cognitive burns a lot of energy for some kids. And again, when I talk about stress being something that we're looking to manage, we're not trying to bubble wrap people. Like that's not what we're trying to do here. You actually need a certain amount of stress to learn. Just like for folks that go to exercise in the gym, you are stressing your muscles for them to grow. You overstress them, you get injured. Same idea here. Too much stress is what we're trying to avoid. And a child who's constantly going in their fight or flight so easily, that's a sign that there's too much stress load in that child's life. But again, we want some stress. You can't just take everything off the table. So just keeping that in mind. Social stress. So school's got a lot of social stress for some kids. Meeting new friends, kids that move schools, they're under a lot of stress. You have to know when you have a student in your class and they just came from another school board or another school, how much are they really concentrating on what you're saying? There's so much stress on them. Cognitive, trying to pick up the routines for the day, trying to follow the teacher's lead, trying to make new friends at recess. Recess is supposed to be a restorative time, but for them it's a stressful time. They're trying to find someone to play with. How's that going to work out? Biological stresses. Maybe the design of the school is different. The lights are different. They're brighter. The class is louder. They were used to the teacher they had previously that kept a quiet class. A lot of things to think about for a student new to the school. And the point being how stressors can cascade on one another, right? A child who doesn't sleep well with that biological stress comes to school with very little energy, and then all of a sudden something at recess happens where they're teased about how they play or how the new clothing that they have on. So now there's that social stress, and now the emotion stress of feeling like nobody cares about them, nobody likes them. So they just cascade on top of each other. And then pro-social stress is that feeling when other people are in distress. It's a lot, like for parents, this is a big one. Your kids come home upset about school, and you go into your red brain state because you're not able to reframe what's happening. So I'll give you an example. My 7-year-old second day of school, JK, she's going to school. I'm a mess, tears. She just is so proud of her firstborn going to school. Second day comes home, Daddy, I don't want any more snacks for school. I said, what happened, honey? She said, this boy ate my snack. He took my snack and just ate it. And I was ready, just like Papa Bear, to go down to the school. Who is this junior kindergarten student doing this to my daughter? And of course I didn't. I reframed. And so I helped my daughter, recognizing that she was in a red brain state. And it's always right before bedtime, by the way. Children, when they're low on energy, all those negative thoughts creep in right before bed because we're low on energy. But anyways, so she said, I don't want any more snacks. I said, well, why? Why? And then I'm helping her reframe the student. Why? Why do you think he took a bite out of your snack? Well, I don't know, Daddy. And so you try and fill in the blanks again. I'm like, do you think, again, questions. Do you think his mom gave him those snacks? Do you think he's ever had those type of snacks? And she's like, well, maybe not, Daddy. I don't know. And I said, oh, well, okay. So what else do you think? She's like, well, I don't know, Daddy. Maybe he was hungry. Maybe he didn't have any. So now I'm getting her to calm down. I could tell she's coming back into her blue brain. And it's interesting with young kids. My daughter brought the exact same story up 3 days later, as if she never spoke to me about it. It's fascinating how the brain works. I did the same thing, asked the same questions, got her to think, got her back in her blue brain. And she did it one more time, I remember, the following week. But again, not scared anymore. Her blue brain has now taken over, has been able to understand the behavior. And funny enough, she packed 2 of the same snacks to give to the other boy, right? She became so confident and was able to reframe. Now she became empathetic and said, you know what? I'm not scared of his behavior. He actually needs another snack. I'm going to give him one. So she brought one. JK student, a few days into JK. Like, to me, that is what we want from children and from adults. Not react, reframe people's behavior, recognize what's stressing them, and then try and help co-regulate them. And it was amazing, right? Like, even this summer, again, my daughter, now at 7 years old, was talking about how this girl was making fun of her. The girl was 9 years old. They were in a day camp, and she's like, Daddy, she's always mean to me. Asked the questions. Well, why do you think she's being mean, Gabriella? I said, normally kids who are mean, they're in their red brain, because we've talked about this. And funny enough, one day she comes back. She's like, Daddy, I think I know why she's so upset all the time. I said, well, what? How do you know? She said, she's like, she doesn't have a daddy. Her daddy passed away. And so here's my daughter making sense of the world and staying calm about it, right? And I'm just like, that's wonderful that she's able to now not react to this person who's being rude to her, but empathize, right? To me, that's powerful. Like, I think if I could teach my kids not to be sucked in by other people's behaviors, then they're much healthier. Because what I didn't mention, when you're in a red brain state, in a fight or flight state, a lot of other things are turning off in your body because it's conserving energy, because it thinks a threat's on the way. So things like immunity shuts off, digestion shuts off, or I shouldn't say shuts off, reduces, cellular repair, because the body can't waste energy on these things. So you find yourself in a fight or flight for long periods of time, you find yourself getting sick. And it's directly connected. And it's not healthy. I don't want my daughter to be reactive to everything that happens to her. I want her blue brain to step in and say, hold on, settle down now. This is why this is happening. And her heart rate stays down, and her blood pressure stays low, and her breathing stays low, and all, and that's kind of what what I'm hoping for in teaching my daughter, but as well as the students in school. Like having that approach. Imagine if we taught this to students in the school and staff and we treated them all the same way, having a safe haven is what we call it. Kids staying safe and feeling safe, able to reframe other children and not react to them. So, and we've had a few situations like that where it's wonderful to see. So, anyways, I can just I'm going to move on to our next slide. So these are the 5 domains within step 2. And like I said, in Stewart's book, Calm, Alert, and Learning, the whole book is pretty much just a chapter for each of these states. So let me go back to, okay, so step 3 is reducing the stress. So essentially, if you recognize certain stressors for that child, the job is to reduce them. So if the class is loud and you can tell a child keeps leaving the classroom without permission, and you ask questions why and figure out what's going on, and they say the class is too loud, the idea is to reduce that stress, right? And having those conversations with parents is essentially, it's like you're putting a cork in the crack of the dam, like, to reduce all that water from coming out. You're trying to reduce the amount of energy that's being burned on stresses that are going on. And so that is a lot of good questions. We call it being a stress detective. So essentially, you're trying to be a stress detective in your class and helping other people out or other students out as to what's causing that stress. Whoever the child is, if they're stress behaving, there is a reason. There's something that's burning tons of energy, and the idea is to reduce that stress and help them. And sometimes I use the 5 senses to kind of help me out with this too, as well as I use the 5 domains. So, for my own children, and sometimes in the school, you never offer a hug to a child. You never just give a child a hug or put your hands on them. You always ask, always. I mean, people have this belief that you don't touch children. Okay, like you can. I'm not going to tell you not to do that and not to live by that. But what I've learned in this is you definitely don't do that when they're in a red brain state and they say no, right? They can always give nonverbal cues as to what they don't want. So for even my own daughter, the little one, she's crying and upset. I'll say, do you want a hug? And I'll put my arms out, because sometimes language is not being processed, but she can process my arms being out, recognizing that means a hug, and she'll say no, or she'll nod her head no, and we don't. And the reason why I'm mentioning this is because for my other one, that reduces the stress. It's that co-regulation, that connection, right? But as an educator, you also have to protect your own stress and not putting yourself in a position that escalates a child. But again, the other senses, sometimes it's a smell. There might be a smell in the classroom that's stressful on a child, and so we reduce that stress. And there was a few years ago, I had a kindergarten teacher come up and she's like, listen to this story. And she said, because we were talking about self-reg and stressors, she said one day she was holding up kindergarten class, if you understand kindergarten class, students, she was holding up a sweater saying, whose sweater is this? And all the kids are just staring blankly at her. Like nobody has a clue as to whose sweater it is. And one girl says, let me smell it. And so teacher's kind of like, okay. So the girl smells, she's like, oh, it's so-and-so's. And so the teacher looked at the child and says, is this yours? And he said, oh yeah, that is mine. And the teacher was kind of like scratching it, like, how is that possible? A week goes by and she kind of tests it again and says, do you know whose sweater this is? And the girl takes it, smells it, and says, is it so-and-so's? Teacher goes to the other child, says, yes, that's mine. And as funny as the story was, we think about that as a potential stressor. So think about this child going into grade 1 or 2 and sitting beside a student who might have a smell to them that's really stressful to her. The student may now get up, walk around the class, trying to walk away from the student. It looks like they're being defiant. They don't want to be rude and say, my friend smells beside me, I can't take the smell. And interesting how that stressor can create other stressors for them and then get them into trouble without asking why and why now. So I just wanted to share that story because I found that was an interesting situation, how that could have led or that could lead to more behaviors for that child.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Claudio, it reminds me of the conversation that you and I had another time, about how, as adults, asking that why and why now question is so important. We may find a child that you've never had an experience with, but maybe your voice sounds like a voice of someone that they had a very negative experience with, or maybe you wear a cologne that happened to be the cologne that somebody wore that they had a very negative. There are a lot of things that people pick up on, not even in a thoughtful way, but just that their brain is getting that input and getting those cues in. So, if a child's behavior, doesn't seem to make sense, I think that really just gets to the why and why now, right? What's going on.
Exactly. No,
Yeah.
and that's just again that why now, and thinking about um, thinking about what is driving that behavior. And as long as we're thinking about it, we're not reacting to it. But again, our own self-regulation, like I said, when you're running out of energy, it's hard to think. Thinking requires a lot of energy, and if you don't have the energy, you're not going to do the thinking. If anything, you're going to rely on past associations or implicit biases or things that require no energy at all, and the answer comes to you right there. But that's an old school way of thinking, maybe, that hasn't been informed yet. So moving on to step 3, just looking at step 4 is enhancing stress awareness. And this is the whole process of Self-Reg, Shanker Self-Reg is a mindful one, but this is where we're trying to recognize our mind and body and what does calm feel like. Teaching kids what calm feels like. So, for example, when kids are doing an activity in the classroom, having that debrief. So we talk about a 3-part lesson plan, and the third part is debriefing the lesson and getting kids to understand, how do you feel right now after doing that activity? How does your mind feel? How does your body feel? For some children, we go down to even just talking about each limb, like how does your arms feel, or how does your belly feel, or your legs feel, or your feet feel when you do this activity. And I've had some in the past say, Mr. Moschella, right before I got into the fight with that boy, my face started really burning, and I would say that is your body telling you you're starting to get really stressed and you're about to go into your red brain. And again, helping them understand that stress awareness, right? When we are in the rat race of life, we are not paying attention to our body. We don't. We just push forward. So for adults, for educators in the building, you'll grab that coffee just to push forward, to keep going with the lesson, or you'll grab that piece of chocolate, whatever it is. And that's how we manage that. We don't even pay attention to our body as what it's trying to tell us. And I think even for children, we have to teach them that. So that reflection piece is to slow things down and recognize, because our body's always giving us signals as if something is not right and it needs a break. And if we ignore that time and time again, we end up getting sick. This is what happens. It manifests itself into some form of illness. So that step 4 is really recognizing your mind and body and where it's at and how it reacts to certain situations. And knowing when you're, like, for me, I've come to finally realize I get this tingling in my chest. That's telling me that whatever the situation is, I'm burning a lot of energy just kind of holding it together in that moment. And I've come to finally realize that in myself. And that's something we can teach children as well, so that they can start to, again, self-regulate on their own. Because the idea here is to teach them to be able to self-regulate on their own eventually. But we don't expect them to do it when they're young. Even in high school, they still need support to co-regulate. But the problem is, I've heard Stuart once say, we overprivilege language when it comes to behavior. We think as soon as they can speak, they can explain themselves and they can articulate what's bothering them, but they can't. They just can't. Even when they're in their blue brain, we need to figure it out for them. We need to help. It's part of us being stress detectives. And the last step is restore. And really, so if step 3 is to reduce so that you don't burn energy, step 5 really is to create more energy reserves, is to restore. And I like to simply say, what brings you joy? What brings you joy is what builds up and restores your energy again. It's those personal strategies. So, and that's a hard question sometimes. If you ask yourself that now, what brings you joy, and you're stumped, you don't give it enough attention. And I struggle with it too sometimes. What can I do in this moment to bring you joy? I'll tell you, the last few days, I have been in a huge rut. And I finally recognized maybe a little bit of exercise, a little bit of outdoors, and a little bit of meditation helped me get ready for today, because I'm like, I cannot be in a rut for this presentation. I have to, and I did those things and I felt better. And, I have a fantastic partner at home that buys into this stuff as well, and she helps me. But step 5 is huge. Is how do you restore? What do you do to build your energy reserves back up? And in this situation, there's growth promoting ways, and there's maladaptive ways. If you are in a stress state for a long time, some people will use alcohol, and alcohol numbs the pain, right? This is how we kind of get into addictions, because alcohol is something quick, doesn't require much energy, and it makes you feel good. But it's maladaptive in the sense it's going to create underlying stressors as well. It's going to cause other issues for you, right? And then you'll need more of it. So understanding that there's adaptive and maladaptive ways. Technology. If I'm scrolling on my phone, in the scroll hole on social media, that needs to be reframed. That is not me restoring myself. That's me just trying to stay awake. It's trying to stay alert, but it's maladaptive. So finding those good ways that builds your energy reserves back is just as important. But the problem is stress has a beautiful way of squashing those. So, for example, if you're a runner and you're overly stressed, you'll say, oh, I'll go running tomorrow. I'm not in the mood today. I'll go running the next. I'm not in the mood. It's amazing. And I think Stuart talked about stress turns off the nucleus accumbens, a part of your brain, which I think is the pleasure center, which enjoys doing these things. I'm not sure if I'm getting that right, but understanding how stress shuts those things down. So for myself, being stressed about the reopening of schools, my daughter's class getting shut down just the week before Christmas, my sister getting COVID, so that messed up our Christmas Eve plans. I noticed I was doing nothing. I was just sitting and just watching Netflix episode after episode. And then I finally dawned on me, I'm like, I'm doing nothing for myself right now. Stress has made me sit on my couch and do nothing. And so that's thinking about your job as well, how when stress becomes too much, you're not even doing things that you enjoy at work. And we talked about that with my staff. We talked about, okay, we can't do anything about COVID. It is a stressor that is here. But what we're not doing is things that are fun at school anymore, within the protocols of COVID. And so we talked about that as a stuff. How do we bring joy back to the school? We can't just wait out COVID. We have to do things that are fun again at school. And so that was us thinking about the 5 steps and going down to step 5 and saying we need to restore our energy. And so we had some conversations with staff about that. How do we do that? Even we had appreciation days. So rather than do them virtually, we went outside. Regardless of the weather, if it was an appreciation for TAs or for educators, we tried to do them outside just to see each other, and that was enjoyable. So that's step 5. So let me just jump. So this is one of my favorite quotes from Stuart Shanker. The well-being of children is inseparable from the well-being of the critical adults in their lives. And people will say, oh, kids nowadays, and but really, when you say kids nowadays, we need to look at the adults. The stress of adults is trickling down to children, and I see it in my own kids. If I'm not firing on all cylinders, their behavior changes, right? If I'm, detached from them, their behavior it gets impacted. And the same thing in schools. We as educators, if we're coming overly stressed and not taking care of ourselves, the students are going to feel it. They're going to feel it in a lackluster lesson. And because you know what, you're just tired as an educator. And so you just put something out there and then the behaviors escalate because they're not engaged. That creates stress for you, more stress for you, stress for the children. We're all connected. And I think we have to take care of ourselves first. Understanding our own self-regulation is really important. And really, it couldn't have come at a more important time with the pandemic going on. Oh, and those were the books, by the way. Someone was asking, so I forgot that I had this slide in there. So Calm, Alert, and Learning reads more like a textbook. It's got chapters all about the 5 domains. These are the same books. One's a hardcover and one's a soft cover. I think this is the hardcover from Stuart Shanker, and that's the soft cover. So it's the same book essentially. But if you were interested in reading those, I really enjoyed them, and of course I've since taken the courses. And after so much learning about SelfReg. I was now invited to facilitate the courses, and I'm always still learning from the learners. They just share stories and connections, and it's just, oh my goodness, I never thought of that. So.
Well, that's great. And I just put the link in for the website as well for the Mehrit Centre, because they do offer a lot of training, and it's training for educators, training for parents, training for others. So really fantastic resource there. We do have a couple of questions and comments I'd like to get to here. Did you have anything else you wanted to say before we get to some questions and comments?
Well,
okay, perfect.
Yep.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close out your screen then, if you don't mind, and just bring us up on full screen. So quite a few comments, and I was just kind of keeping notes, so bear with me for a second. So I'm going to go back a little bit, and Nicole had a kind of shared a little bit of a story, and said that they have a program in their school district that uses seclusion. The seclusion closets are in the room. These are classrooms of maybe 6 to 7 students, grades K through 2nd and 3 through 5, that have been labeled as behavioral problems. How can you get a student out of fight or flight with a reminder that they might be next to go into that closet? Kindergartner got moved into one of these rooms and told a colleague, "I've been put in the restraint room now." What a fantastic point. And, again, thinking about the model here and the model of stress, that is increasing stress, certainly probably leading to a child that doesn't feel safe. I mean, frankly, my view on that is, it's placing a trauma site within a classroom. Wow. What are your thoughts?
Well, really, right away, I would be thinking about my 5 steps. Like, that's kind of what is ingrained in my head. So, obviously, that child, whatever's going on with them, was possibly giving telltale signs to start leading up to that incident. But again, I'd be reframing. Why is this happening? Why now? That was one situation. It didn't happen the next day or the day before, or maybe it did. But to me, it then becomes a conversation with parents just to know, was it a rough start to the morning? Are they coming with an empty tank of gas to know that as soon as I put one challenge in front of them, they're going to have a meltdown? So that's a conversation I would definitely have with the parents. Because sometimes parents, what I also learned before I learned SelfReg is, with the age of technology now, these are young kids, but even some of them I've learned wake up in the middle of the night, find their device, and just stay up for 2 or 3 hours, unbeknownst to the parents. And so one of my questions always to parents is, did you wake your child up today, or did they wake up on their own? More often than not, I had to wake my child up. They didn't want to come to school. I'm like, they're exhausted. So now they come to school, and as soon as the teacher says, okay, we're going to do this activity, and it's an activity that requires energy, and it's a cognitive activity that they find very difficult, the meltdown occurs because they're trying to resist and avoid it, right? And now in this particular room, it seems like there's an understanding to use this restraint closet. So there needs to be a proactive approach in recognizing the stressors for this child. I mean, I would also document that. I'm sure it's not the first time that child had a reaction, but some, you don't know what's at threat for the child, what's causing the threat for the child. And if they're already coming with very little energy, and it sounds like being in this room, that they probably have a very low threshold for stress. So it's very hard for them to be resilient because they just have a low threshold for stress. But again, for me, the approach is always the 5 steps, is recognizing what the stressor is, trying to reduce it. When they're in good spirits, trying to find those activities that restore them, and then you talk about step 4 is slowly over time is teaching the child, when they're getting upset, what can they do? When their body is telling them this is not feeling right for me, what can we do? Like for some students in my school, they get a pylon, they put it on their desk. We have helped them enough to find a safe space in the school, and they go to it, right? So we have a student that, would just leave the classroom. Well, that was a problem. We didn't want that because we didn't know where they went. So, we didn't stop them, because what you can't do is you can't stop behavior. It's energy. You can't stop energy. You can transform it. Behavior, you cannot stop it. You tell a child to stop it, you're trying to get them to turn off their red brain by saying stop it. And it doesn't work.
When their blue brain is not even accessible, if their red brain is, right.
Exactly. You want them to have self-control in that moment, and they won't.
Yeah.
So you never stop behavior. You got to change it.
Yeah. I mean, to Nicole's point as well, one of the things that I've found is I think there is sometimes a blind spot for educators in terms of school-based trauma. If you're putting a child in a seclusion room alone against their will and holding the door shut, that's traumatizing. And when you've traumatized a child like that, the stressor's right there in the classroom. It's much akin to when you have an individual that they, for some reason, have had a stressful experience with. As long as that stimuli is still there, they're on that heightened sense of alert. So I think, were I the administrator of that school, I would certainly step back and think, well, gee, it's probably not a great idea to have these seclusion closets in my
No.
classroom. But
Well, no,
that's a journey, right?
yes, and that again. So if we think about the Stephen Porges and the response to stress, you're taking that child and you're taking social engagement off the table right away by putting them in the closet. That's essentially what you're doing. You're taking off social engagement. The challenge, though, also is your own reaction, your own red brain. Like, when you see these huge meltdowns in children, your red brain is registering that. When I first arrived at my school, I didn't know every child, so I looked at every child, and nobody set me off. Like, nobody set off my red brain. I had no history with any of these kids, but some of them had some really stressful situations the previous year, and I'm sure they scared some of the educators. You can't help it, right? If you can't reframe that behavior or understand where it's coming from, you're going to get scared. So the reaction could be in this particular class is, I've seen this before. I've been hit by this. I got hit in the jaw, or I got pushed, or I don't want to get hurt. And you go in the seclusion room. So that seclusion closet is really perpetuating the issue here. It sounds like, as if it's removing social engagement. It's a tough one. It's definitely a tough. It's no right answer there. That's a hard one, though. I will say.
So I'm going to try to get through a couple questions here real quickly because we've got a few more. Anna asked about if you have experience working with kids that have fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, I believe it is. Is there anything you add to the SelfReg? So, I mean, you could probably take that and even expand it out even beyond FASD to, autism or other, other types of challenges. Are there things that you, in implementing the SelfReg, is it any different? Is it any different with, any child or any adult?
Well, I recall a couple of years ago, I did have a child. I worked with a child with FASD, and I'll tell you, you have to recognize that sometimes it's a Plan A day where you're able to work with the child and do some curriculum, and then we'd have a Plan B day. The child is extremely dysregulated, and you have to have a Plan D day where you're just focusing on their self-regulation, and that would be we'd go for walks we had a forested area, and nature has a magical way of calming most of us down. And that's what it would be like. So it became like a Plan A and Plan B day. But again, the approach is the same: reframing the behavior, recognizing what's causing that child's stress, and trying to reduce it for them, and then finding ways to get them to recognize. When they're calm enough, I ask questions. What does your body feel like right before you get upset, or just to get them to reflect, and then we do something restorative. So again, it is always the same approach, but this is why I really appreciate the work of Stuart Shanker and Self-Regulation. Is the 5-step approach. It's not a program. It's not do this, then you get this result. It's a mindset shift. It's an approach. It's a process. It's a journey, and it changes. How you self-regulate as a 10-year-old is going to change when you're a 30-year-old. But the steps, the approach, work for everybody. It's the same kind of idea.
Absolutely. That's great. I have a comment here from Carol who said, behavior is a symptom like squinting when you need glasses. It's a lack of support somewhere or in an inappropriate setting. The focus is on curing behavior versus finding the need is the problem. And a great comment there because, very often, again, people are focused on the behavior, and the behavior is really the symptom. It's not the, I'm trying to think of, there's another saying about that, but I mean, the behavior is just really kind of the signal, right? I guess that's what Ross Green would say. It's the signal.
Yes. No, I would agree with that. It's, and it is I would say it's an uphill battle because you have to think historically how we've treated behavior, that's kind of what we're up against. And it's interesting how science is there to tell us otherwise, and we're so slow to follow along or to even believe it. That is the approach. Like when I first started learning about SelfReg and sharing it, I think staff thought I came up with it. They're like, why are you doing this? This doesn't work. I'm like, but the science says it does. So it's interesting, even then, that the resistance to it, right? Because realistically, it requires a lot of energy to do something new, right? It requires tons of energy to change the way you think, right? It's a lot, and it's much easier to do it what you already know, if it works or not. Even though it creates more work for you, it's still much easier in your mind, right?
So this is a long one. I'll just kind of read through it real quickly. Amy said, I just want to say thank you. This information is helping me to change as a parent trying to help my daughter with post-traumatic stress disorder and understand myself and my trauma issues as well. I don't know if she'll ever be able to go to school again at 16 with what's happened, but these things should have been common sense from the indoor education system. I would probably never trust the school, never mind my daughter trusts me for putting her back in a system that's clearly unsupportive of what our children and trailed off there, but assumingly kind of what children need. And so many, whether it's a school or, I think about, there's entire, for-profit industries like the troubled teen industry that, are selling this idea that, oh, you've got a child with behaviors, bring them to us and we will manipulate their behavior. We will punish their behavior. We will do all of these things that are incredibly traumatizing and lead to, exactly what Amy's talking about traumatic stress. But I guess, that's what comes along with everybody is all of the experiences that we've had. And you probably, again, had those conversations with parents who had been not listened to, not heard, accused, and that's a hard shift to make.
It is, and I just want to say, Amy, that and I can't imagine what you've gone through and how painful the journey must have been. But one thing we always say is it's never too late to self-regulate. Like it's never too late to get on this journey. I mean, I was 40 when I started learning about it, and I feel like it's helping me as a person enjoy life a little bit more, and helps me understand. And truthfully, I have many bad days still. And I still react to my kids' behavior in a red brain state. But I know enough that once I get to my blue brain, I can always repair it with them. I can always help them make sense of what they saw in me. So just as a parent to parent, I'm sure you've had moments where you probably weren't at your finest, but your child, as long as you can help them make sense, it gets them back into their blue brain. And for my little girls, when I kind of get into that red brain state because of their behavior, I always go back and say, do you know why daddy did that? And just to help them. And now they're able to say, they see me getting red brain, daddy, we know this is happening to you. And it's just the point I'm trying to make. It's never too late. And
it's a journey, right?
It's a journey. It's a journey for sure. So had I been 20 when I started this, I wonder where I'd be as a 40-something-year-old person, being able to self-regulate a lot better.
So I'm going to go to one final comment here, and I know we've gone a little bit long today, so I apologize, Claudio, about kind of keeping you here. But we've had a couple conversations before. I think we could go for quite some time. This one from Kim said, instead of seclusion rooms, closets, my wish would be to see rooms with plants, soft places to sit, pillows, calming colors. Then a professional who would listen to students if verbal. Children want to be seen and heard. Behavior is communication. All great points.
Well, that's funny you say that. Yes, behavior is communication. We always talk about that. But funny you say that because the first thing I did in the school when I came here is I put 3 ferns in the hallway. There's a fern at every drinking fountain. I have tropical plants that lead to the gym. And I learned that in working with my first principal. She said, it's important that you make the school not a sterile environment that's not welcoming. And so these ferns have been alive for 3 years. And yeah, I agree with you. It's funny you mentioned that part.
Yeah, let's face it. We've all gone in and seen schools that resemble prisons more than they resemble schools, and I think that's part of the problem of what we end up with, kind of the school to prison pipeline, where kids are in these systems that are very punitive and kind of continue to go along their journey without really being, heard and seen, and end up with very poor outcomes. Just wanted to highlight a couple of comments here. Anna said, "Thank you so much for inspiring us with your self-reg journey, Claudio." And Carol just agreed with the learning about aesthetics are being important. Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
in the 70s, and we forgot. So with that, I'm going to go ahead here and just see if you have any final things that you would like to share. I'm sure if I took a poll here right now and asked our audience who would like a principal at their school like Claudia, we'd probably have a lot of job opportunities for you. I'm sure that there'd be a lot of people that would be excited to have you come to their school. So if you ever want to move, we've got people, I've seen them from Australia, New Zealand, the United States, probably a lot of opportunities. But, one of my hopes in doing these, these kind of events, Claudia, is that somebody out there sees your journey and is inspired. And I'd love to see parents share this with their principals or with their teachers, or teachers share it with their administrators. If the outcome of doing something like this is somebody makes a lens shift and begins moving in that direction of like you did, kind of in your own journey of all this, it's certainly the reason we do it. We really want to encourage and inspire people, and your story is really inspiring, and really appreciate you coming here, sharing with us your story and the things that you've learned. And the fact that like you said, this is a journey. I mean, I look back at kind of my own experience and think, gee, as I was listening to some of the things you said, I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm not ready to be a father again. I have two children. They're 12 and 16, but I at times wish I knew all that I know now then. So, definitely a journey. But with that, let me just ask if there's anything else you want to share, or any final thoughts you'd like to share with us.
Well, I just want to say thank you for everybody who's joined us, and thank you, Guy, for having me on it. Like you said, all I want to do is share this and spread it around, and just create the ripple effect. And I trust once you throw that rock in the pond, that wherever the ripples go, that there will be more after that. And I just want to remind everybody that yes, we are trying to help children and students, but don't forget to help yourself. It really, when I first took the courses, I was trying to help students. By the end of the course, I realized it was all about me. And the better I am taking care of myself, the better I can extend myself to help others. So don't forget that, people. You really have to take care of yourself. Like we say, you got to put the mask on yourself in the plane first. There's a reason for that. The same thing with life. So thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. And just one final thought here. I know in talking to you that you might have other plans in the future, and if you're doing more work to whether it's a podcast or whatever you might be doing, please let us know. Certainly would like to share the things that you're doing, or if you're teaching any kind of a session on this, please let us know. We'd like to share that with our audience as well. So I will let you go at this point, but thank you so much. I have a couple announcements for everyone else, but Claudio, thank you, and we'll look forward to talking to you again.
Thank you. Take care, everybody.
All right. So just for everybody else, I just want to mention that again, we will be having another session, I think, again in 2 weeks, and I don't have a slide for you for that, but it's going to be another great one. And I'm just actually pulling up my calendar as I speak, because I am still got kind of a little bit of a holiday brain here, and trying to remember what's coming in another 2 weeks is a little tough. Yes, we're going to be talking about some really interesting things in 2 weeks, and you won't want to miss it. So be sure to join us again 2 weeks from today, and we will be on at 3:30 Eastern time. Again, these are always recorded, so you can go back and look at them later. So thank you, everybody else. Hope you have a wonderful new year as we get moving into the new year, and look forward to seeing you again soon. Bye-bye.